God has been good.
Hallelujah.
Let us go to God now for a moment of prayer as we prepare for the preaching of God's precious word. Perfect and wonderful God, I thank you for another opportunity, dear God, to stand behind this, your sacred and consecrated desk, and stand in the shoes of John to share a word of encouragement and love with your people. I pray, dear God, now that your Holy Spirit will rest in our hearts, and we, dear God, shall have a good time in the precious name of Jesus, feasting on what has been written in your holy word. Now these and all other blessings we ask in the name of your Son and our Savior, and let all God's people say, Amen. Amen. I'm going to ask you to please join me in the gospel as written by Mark in the 4th chapter. Very popular passage of scripture. Mark 4, 35 through 41. Mark 4, verses 35 through 41. And I will be reading from the New Revised Standard Version of the Holy Bible. Mark 4, verses 35 through 41. On that day, when evening had come, he said to them, "Let us go across to the other side." And leaving the crowd behind, they took him with them in the boat, just as he was. Other boats were with him. A great windstorm arose, and the waves beat into the boat so that the boat was already being swamped. But he was in the stern, asleep on the cushion. And they woke him and said to him, "Teacher, do you not care that we are perishing?" He woke up and rebuked the wind and said to the sea, "Peace, be still." Then the wind ceased, and there was a dead calm. He said to them, "Why are you afraid? Have you still," somebody say still, "have you still no faith?" And they were filled with great awe and said to one another, "Who then is this, that even the wind and the sea obey him?" The word of God for the people of God. Praise be to God. My brothers and my sisters, for just a few moments this morning, I want to talk with you from the topic, faith in the midst of your storm. Faith in the midst of your storm. February is Black History Month in America. It's a time when we celebrate the accomplishments of some of America's finest citizens. In doing so, we impliedly recognize that those individuals had to go through some of life's storms, but rarely do we ever talk about their faith. When we talk about Thurgood Marshall, the first African-American to serve on the United States Supreme Court, and the lawyer who argued the landmark case, Brown v. Board of Education, we talk about Thurgood Marshall's confidence in the midst of a storm called Jim Crow segregation. When we talk about the cases he won and his arguments before the court. Rarely, however, do we ever talk about the fact that when Thurgood Marshall traveled from New York City down to places in the Deep South, he did so because he had faith. Rarely do we ever talk about the fact that when he traveled from New York, the good people of the church put him up here in the South because it wasn't safe for him to stay in hotels. Rarely do we ever talk about the fact that the good people of the church fed Thurgood Marshall because restaurants refused to serve him. Rarely do we talk about the fact that the good people of the church put hands on Thurgood Marshall and covered him in prayer for success in his legal battles and for traveling grace and mercy. Thurgood Marshall was a person of immense faith in the midst of life storms. When we talk about our AME sister, Rosa Parks, we talk about her taking a seat for justice so all of us could stand with human dignity. She had a storm called discrimination in public accommodation when she began the Montgomery bus boycott. Rarely, however, do we ever talk about the fact that Sister Rosa Parks, much like Sister Evans, much like Sister Carter, was a faithful stewardess of St. Paul African Methodist Episcopal Church in Montgomery, Alabama. She was a person of tremendous faith. But watch this. When we talk about one of the most popular figures of the 20th century, the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., we often talk about him as a powerful speaker, but rarely do we ever talk about him as a powerful preacher. We talk about him as a speaker because he told the world, I have a dream. I have a dream that is deeply rooted in the American dream that one day people will not be judged by the color of their skins, but by the content of their character. Dr. King told America he had a dream. We talk about him as a speaker, but rarely do we ever talk about the fact that he was a dyed-in-the-wool Baptist preacher. And many of the storms he had to deal with in life were undergirded by his faith. Now, somebody out there may be saying, preacher, it's all well and good to talk about Thurgood Marshall. It's all well and good to talk about Rosa Parks, and it's all well and good to talk about Dr. King. I understand it's Black History Month and they went through some storms in their life. But I came to church this morning because I need a word from the Lord. I came to church this morning because I'm dealing with some storms in my life and I need to know if Jesus is real. Well, my brothers and sisters, what I want to share with you this morning is that the same Jesus who showed up for Thurgood Marshall back then is the same Jesus who showed up for you right now. The same Jesus who showed up for Rosa Parks back then is the same Jesus who will show up for you right now. And the same Jesus who was with Dr. King back then is the same Jesus who will be with you right now. All you have to do, just like them, is hold on to your faith in the midst of life storms. When we look at the text this morning now, we continue an annual observation of Black history, but really a daily walk of faith, as we give God some praise in the midst of life storms. And we're preaching this morning from the early part of Mark's narrative about Jesus' earthly ministry. Now, in the first few chapters of Mark, we find Jesus working out a few miracles and trying to bring people closer to God by teaching them and talking with them in the form of parables. Mark tells us about Jesus cleansing a brother who was a leper and healing a brother who was a paralytic, before telling us about Jesus' extensive attempts to reach people by teaching and talking in the form of parables. Now, at this part, the latter part of chapter 4 in Mark's Gospel, Jesus is tired. And Jesus is ready to go to sleep. Remember, Jesus is wholly divine, but at the same time, Jesus is wholly human. It's at this part of the biblical text where Jesus, apparently just like me or you, will get tired in the midst of doing the work of the Lord. It's in this part of the text, we see the holy human Jesus and the holy divine Jesus show up with all of Jesus that's with us in the midst of life storms. Jesus is inviting us to get into the boat to go to the other side. Now, in looking at this text and applying this text to our lives, I believe Mark is speaking to us in this text, and Mark is teaching us three specific things. First, I believe Mark is teaching us there's a promise that there will be a storm in your life. There's a promise there will be a storm in your life. Mark is also teaching us that there is promise in the midst of your storm. There is promise in the midst of your storm. And I think Mark is also teaching us, regardless of whether your name is Thurgood Marshall, regardless of whether your name is Martin Luther King, regardless of whether your name is J. Augustine or Jeffrey Bruce, it matters not so much who you are when you're in the midst of a storm. Remember whose you are. The first point in this text is this: there's a promise to be a storm in your life. When we look at the text now, before going to sleep, Jesus invited his disciples to go with him on a little trip. They were invited to go with Jesus to get across to the other side. Now, I always say, my brothers and sisters, we can look at a biblical text in at least two ways. We can look at the text literally, but we can also look at the text figuratively. Meaning we can look at the text symbolically. We can look at the text symbolically because it always has a greater application to our lives. Now, in literally looking at this text, I believe that Jesus was there on the seashore in Galilee, and he invited the disciples to go with him across to the other side to Gerasene. But figuratively looking at this text, or symbolically speaking about this text, I believe Jesus was inviting his disciples to go on a journey to the other side of their lives. In other words, Jesus was trying to get them from where they were and ask them to have enough faith to go with me to get to the place I want you to be. Jesus invited Thurgood Marshall, Rosa Parks, and Martin Luther King Jr. all to go on a trip and get into a boat and travel with him to the other side, and Jesus invited the disciples too. Jesus invited them to go to the other side of America to hold these truths to be self-evident, that all people really are created equally. Jesus invited other people to travel to the other side as part of Black history. Jesus invited Garrett Morgan to go to the other side by tapping into his potential and creating what we call the traffic light, so people could get around in commerce in urban Americas, not just in America, urban places rather, not just in America, but all across the world. Jesus invited Charles Drew to go to the other side, to travel with him by creating a blood plasma that would save people's lives right here in the United States of America. But watch this. Jesus also invited a young brother from a single-parent home by the name of Barack Obama to go to the other side, because Jesus asked him to get into the boat and realize his opportunity, realize the possibility of potential, so young men and young women could all achieve their dreams based on what Barack Obama did here in the United States of America. God wants us all to go to the other side to reach the potential God has placed in our hearts. But now somebody here is saying, preacher, I know it's Black History Month, and I'm not mad at you for talking about Barack Obama. I hear you talking about all that, but I'm dealing with my own version of a storm, and I want to know if there's room for me in that boat with Jesus too. What I'm trying to say this morning is that Jesus has invited us all to get into our own version of the boat and travel with him across to the other side, because Jesus wants you to get to the place where you reach your full potential and reach all that's been planted inside of you. For somebody here, getting across to the other side means getting a certification, because it means more take-home pay, so you can take care of your family and get just a little bit more Benjamins, baby. For somebody else here, getting across to the other side, Sister Janelle, means getting that degree you've been working so hard on and paying for, my daughter. It means you're setting an example not just for others, but for that beautiful young lady you're raising, so you can tell her, I truly can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. Getting across to the other side may mean getting through a damaging relationship, letting go of the past, letting go of something that's broken, recognizing that God loves you, God wants you to be happy, and God has something in store for you too. That's how you get across to the other side. In other words, when we open up our hearts and when we open up our minds to the possibility of what God is trying to teach us in this biblical text, we must realize that we all have a version of a boat, and all of us are called on by Jesus to get to the other side. Regardless of whether your fight is for civil rights or your fight is for silver rights to try to take care of your family, storms in life will come your way. Hold on to your faith, though, because God is still God and God is still on the throne. That's the first point in this biblical text. There's a promise to be storms in your life. The question I have for you is, will you hold on to your faith in the midst of the storm? The second point I believe Mark is teaching us this morning is, there's promise in the midst of your storm. There is promise in the midst of your storm. When we look at the text now, back in verses 37 through 39, Mark tells us that in the midst of the storm, in the midst of the winds that symbolically represent forces that will try to slow you down and stand in opposition to you, in the midst of the gushing waters that represent the chaos in your life that tries to take you off path, Mark tells us that in the midst of the storm, when it seemed like all was lost and people were at their worst, Jesus had fallen asleep. In other words, Jesus had already found peace. Because Jesus had the promise of knowing that no matter what a situation might look like, God can still make a way out of no way. No matter what a situation might look like, God can still turn a frown upside down. God will always be with you and God will never leave you, and that's the promise in the midst of your storm. Let me give you an example of what I mean. Years ago, the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was preparing for an early morning flight. He was going to be traveling away from his family when, as usual, the phone rang. And it was a threat against his wife and his children. A threat to kill them the next time he traveled from his home. Martin Luther King Jr. reached the point where tears started to come down his eyes, and he sat there at the kitchen table and had what he wrote about as a midnight cup of coffee. That's what Dr. King said, I could no longer do this thing alone. And he learned, as the people say in the church, to let go and let God. And that is when King's ministry really started to flourish, because King had a peace that transcended all understanding, realizing that there is promise in the midst of the storm. Now watch this. In applying this text to our lives and in recognizing that there's promise in the midst of all of our storms, as we too go through this thing called life, if we are like the disciples and we are called to get into the boat, if we are like the disciples and Jesus is calling each and every one of us to travel to the other side, and if we are like the disciples and it's true that there always will be storms in life, the question I ask for you is, where is Jesus in this text? Jesus is not back safe on the seashore saying, go ahead, I'm cheering for you. Jesus is not on the other side saying, I'm waiting for you when you get through. Jesus is right there in the boat with the disciples in the midst of the storm. Jesus is right there with them because Jesus will never leave you. Jesus is right there with them because Jesus will never forsake you. Jesus is right there with them because Jesus will never abandon you. Jesus is right there with them because Jesus will strengthen you. Jesus is right there with them because Jesus will provide for you. And Jesus is right there with them because Jesus believes in you. And Jesus, have enough faith, my brothers and sisters, to believe Jesus will never leave you, and Jesus will also bless you when you're in the midst of your storm, so somebody else wants to know, what kind of God do you serve? The second point this morning is remember there is always promise in the midst of your storm. The third and the final point I want to touch this morning, the third thing I believe Mark is trying to teach us in this early part of his gospel is don't worry about anybody else. Remember whose you are in the midst of your storm. When we look at the text now in verse 40, after Jesus stills the wind, meaning after Jesus stops those opposing forces, those forces that want to try to slow you down when you're trying to get to the other side, Jesus asked a question like this: why are you afraid? And then Jesus uses this word, why do you still have no faith? In other words, by asking why you still have no faith, Jesus is literally asking, based on all that your eyes have seen and all that your ears have heard, based on all that you know I have done, do you still have doubts about the mighty power of the God we serve? Do you still have doubts that you, my brothers and my sisters, are a child of the Most High and you are highly favored? Jesus is asking them in the early part of the Gospel of Mark, based on what you saw me do in cleansing this leper, based on the healing you saw me give this paralytic, based on the miracle I worked out in the life of this brother with a withered hand, I know you didn't catch everything I was trying to say in these parables, but I'm trying to ask you now, do you still have no faith? If Jesus was with us in church this morning, I hope Jesus is with us in church this morning. If Jesus was with us in church this morning, and if Jesus is in your heart, Jesus might be asking somebody, based on the miracle you saw me pull off in the hospital, based on the way you saw me work your situation out, and based on what you saw me do for a member of your family, do you still have no faith? Based on the way you were in between jobs, trying to rob Peter, because you had to pay Paul. Based on the fact that money got funny and change got strange, but I kept food on your table, I kept clothes on your children's back. You hadn't missed any meals, you're still driving your car, and you're still living in that house. Do you still have no faith? Jesus is saying, after I brought you through that uncomfortable situation called divorce, after I brought you through an in-between job, after I turned the frown upside down in your life, do you still doubt that you are a child of the Most High? And do you still have no faith? Jesus is a rock in a weary land, and Jesus is shelter in the time of storm. Jesus is a healer. Jesus is a savior. Jesus is a miracle worker. Jesus is a provider. Jesus is a change agent, and Jesus will be with you. Jesus will lead you. Jesus will never forsake you in the midst of my storm. Jesus is with you in the midst of the storm. I want to close out now by telling you a story about one of Jesus's closest ones in that boat who was in the midst of another storm. The apostle we know as John. Jesus called him the beloved disciple. Unlike the other disciples who were beheaded, who were killed, who were castigated, John was relegated to a penal colony on an island called Patmos. When John was in isolation, going through the midst of a storm, John wrote what the Lord told him in what we now call the Revelation, according to John. In the 18th chapter of the Revelation, John might as well have been talking about life in Birmingham or Mobile or Montgomery, Alabama in the 1960s. Because John talks about his oppressors, the Romans. He uses the code word Babylon. And he writes about the fall of Babylon. Mighty Emperor Bull Connor, mighty Emperor George Wallace losing their power. All of that was his storm. But after the storm that he writes about in chapter 18. When John begins chapter 19 of the Revelation, he says, then, denoting what happened in chapter 18, he says, then I saw a magnitude or crowd of people, and they sang together. Hallelujah, salvation and glory, honor and power to the Lord our God. Yeah, the Lord our God is mighty. Yes, the Lord our God is omnipotent. The Lord